like, yeah. Then you'll be like, wow, I'm talking about blackness in America.
Cool. Wait, start again.
Down, yeah. I've been feeling so down. Yeah.
Welcome to Talking About Blackness in America. Hi, I'm Kadai.
Hi, I'm Esther.
And today we are going to be getting very upfront, close, and personal about our experiences with race in America. Thank you for joining us. It's going to be worth it, trust me. First of all, you can start by introducing yourself, where you're going at school, what your major is, and what has your experience with race been so far at the school that you've gone to?
So, I'm Esther. I'm a junior. I'm about to be a senior next year, and I'm studying African American Studies and Human Development Social Relations with a minor in Public Health. I'm also a student athlete. I'm on the track team, and I'm also on the women's soccer team. That's kind of where like my experience with race began, because coming from I'm from Zimbabwe. Coming from Zimbabwe, like I'd always, all my teams had been like majority black, and then I came here and I was like one of two or one of three on my soccer team. I was already experiencing like culture shock from being in America, but then you have like normal culture shock and then like black culture shock.
That is a good way to put it. Like, I'm thinking of it too, because for me, I was also an athlete, and okay, so here's where it gets weird. I played field hockey, right? And even in Zimbabwe, field hockey is a majority white sport, right? But there were like a substantial number of black people on the team when I was an upper sixth. I played with white people in high school, but it was a completely different experience from playing with white people in college, you know?
White Americans are very different from white Zimbabweans. You can't like explain it. It's a very different, it's really like TV.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So like, you know, like the jocks and everything.
Yeah.
Like I know the culture shock video. I was like, it's not the America of the movies, but in terms of like being an athlete, it
actually
is. So
I was also the only international student on my team. So my first like week in America was only with my team, and like there was one other girl who was African American, and then me, and then like all white people.
Like, what was your relationship on campus, like in your first semester, your first year, with either black students, like African students, and African American students? Like, what was that like, and how did you navigate that?
Due to like being like sucked in automatically by like student athlete culture, I automatically, like it was me. Were you still on the, you were still on the hockey team?
Yeah, I was still on the hockey
And Kadzai, I think we were the only Africans on sports teams. Like women's sports teams at least.
Yeah, actually.
And then like all the other black people were African Americans. My first black friends were like African Americans. It's like interesting because I think they could never relate to like my culture shock of being like black in America, because it's like their whole life. Like it's just normal, I guess. So like it was still good having a core group of like black friends. But like, I think it was only until I became close with other African students that like I find like it was more like I was comfortable in all who I was. So I think there is a very big difference, like, and like it's important as a freshman coming in to like have relationships with like black students, but like I think it's still key to like have relationships with other African students.
When you come to the US, you're not like, no one's gonna see that you're African. You are blackity black, like, you know, people just see your outside shell, and they immediately have these assumptions about you. And that's one thing that I had to really like grapple with, where it's like all of a sudden this entire struggle of the entire black race is on your shoulders in the classroom. How did you navigate that?
It was one of the first shocks I had, because growing up at home, yes, like you knew you weren't white, but then I think when I came here, like all of a sudden, like I was like the black friend in friend groups, and like and in the classroom, like I was expected to know like all this stuff about like history of like the whole black world. it was like the majority of classes, like you'll be the only African in the class. But then like sometimes you'll be the only black person too. So you also now like you're expected to know so much. I think that's like something that I had to learn so quickly was like African American history. And like to know, because when people just like ask you or like look at you and expect you to know, you're kind of just like, I'm not from here. And then like it's like people understand, but they also like look down at you and like, I don't know, it's like an expectation. ESEM.
Yeah, what was your ESEM?
Mine, okay, so my first, actually it was my first class I ever took.
Yeah. My ESEM was called the Middle Passage.
Oh.
So it was so challenging for everybody, like for me personally, because everyone was like, oh, you're from Africa, so tell us. But also you're black, so tell us, you know? And I'm like, I'm here also to learn. Like, this is not my place for me to be educating the white kids in my class about like specific issues pertaining to race, but like also I was there to learn about African American history. So like, because I didn't know, and I was like, I need to know about this because everybody keeps assuming that I should know. Yeah.
My ESEM was called Race in Class. I was lucky that I wasn't the only black person there.
Okay.
So I was the only African, but I wasn't, there was like 2 black men in my class. I was trying so hard to hold on. So like my paper was about like Southern Africa. I only spoke about and related like my readings to like Zim or like Southern Africa. So like I think that was a lot of my first semester was like, I'm African. And like I was like not yet in that, like because I hadn't taken a class about African American culture or history, I like held on so tightly to like I'm African and not to like, okay, well when I'm walking down the street like no one cares. Only in my second semester when I realized like I didn't even know African history. Like we're not even taught like continental history, or at least the school that I went to. That's when I kind of like looked at myself like, okay, you need to like educate yourself, because like although it's not your job to educate other people, they expect that in classrooms, unfortunately.
Did you ever feel like you had a conflict of identity?
Yes, I think this is the most like conflict that you'll have in college if you're like black and African. I kind of knew like African American culture from TV and like from like learning at EDUSA or like at home, but like I don't think you will ever truly understand it until you're like here. Freshman year for sure, because I was clinging on so hard to the fact that I was like African. And then I remember like James, one of my professors, was like, girl, you are black. Like I don't care where you're from. And I was just like, like other times when I had this is like there's a lot of conflict hidden or out in the open between African and African Americans.
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
And like, I think there is a lot of tension. And like, as someone who is friends with people from both sides,
Yes.
it really is just a difference in culture.
Do you think also it could be a misunderstanding? For me, I felt like it was the lack of communication between the two groups.
I remember I was hanging out with like the athletes and like the African Americans, and like I would always say like hi, but like I think it was like oh, she's hanging out with them. Especially today, there is solidarity on campus, and especially I think moving forward after like everything and all the recent happenings in America, because people are realizing that like it's more black solidarity, and like all our like personal and like little arguments have to take the backseat.
That's true. Do you have any advice for our African students, our Zimbabwean students coming to the US?
Okay, I feel like an old woman. Like, let me share my knowledge. First and foremost, I think it's really important, like from the get-go, to have and to understand the importance of having like African friends, the people that you're close to and you can talk to, because like you are gonna have problems that like other international students aren't gonna be able to relate to, and like Americans aren't gonna be able to relate to, and like even African Americans or like other black people aren't gonna be able to relate to. Another piece of advice, in this time of quarantine, and like you have so much time before college, I think it is really like, if you're a reader, read books about being black in America, and if you're a movie watcher, watch movies and series about it. Like, educate yourself, because the minute you get off the plane, you're black. Like, no matter how light you are, how privileged you are in Zim, it doesn't matter. It's like, to understand it's okay to not know exactly. Like, it's really okay to ask like other black people, or like other, like even like well-versed like non-black people.
Ask questions. If you don't know,
ask. Do not assume. I'm telling you, do not do that.
Coming from a homogenous country, like almost everyone you know is probably black. Like there's a few white people you know, and like the other, you know, ethnicities that you would know. Don't assume people's ethnicity. That could get you into a lot of trouble. Don't do that. Like if you see a brown person and just assume they're Indian, don't do that.
We've left that train back home.
Yeah. So be okay with not being correct all the time.
Exactly.
Because you are in a new place, you're learning a new culture, and yeah, it's okay.
In Zim, if you're like pulled over by the police or something, you can like try and talk your way out of paying fines, or like, you know, you try to have conversation. Here, like, it's not the same game. If there's one time when TV is correct, it is now.
About the police. Make sure you always have your ID on you, like some sort of like identification.
Even on campus, like, always make sure you have your like student ID.
Yeah, because you might be going to a college where they use the police on campus. Here we're very lucky that we have like our own like public safety campus police, which is very different and like I would say more lenient in comparison to like when the police sometimes shows up and people start freaking out.
Yeah.
Be mindful and cautious when it pertains to like the police, security, any of that, because
government.
As long as you're black, you already have a target on your back in a sense. So yeah.
And like depending on where you go, even being like not American and black, now we're bringing in xenophobia, and this is like a whole different topic.
I'm gonna link in like description below all of the resources that I have had the privilege of accessing from the Black Lives Matter movement, and like all the resources they've been sharing, so that you can get to all of those and read through all of those while you still have time before you get to college.